So good morning, everyone. Nick, thanks for the kind introduction. Thank you for having me and giving me some time, well, to add some local perspective on the question of smart city and on the question on how cities handle data. What I've planned for today, for say the next 20 minutes, is tell you something about the digital city strategy of Hamburg. I'll first start telling you what the strategy is about in a more abstract way, and after that go into more detail regarding some projects where we actually use data, and then maybe give you a glimpse on what are the problems and the chances of using data for the city of Hamburg. So as you might be aware, Hamburg is not just a city, not just a municipality, but as well is a federal state of Germany. That gives us some advantage regarding all the topics related with smart city, because we can change the law on the federal state level. This makes some things easier compared to cities like Cologne or Munich, which are just a municipality, and they obviously can't change law for Bavaria or North Rhine-Westphalia. So this is some advantage we have in Hamburg. Coming from there, Hamburg has been economically successful, has been so in all different parts of the economy. It starts with the port. We got, for example, the biggest copper mill of Europe in the middle of the city. We got publishing houses like Spiegel and Zeit, and we got digital companies as well like Google and Facebook or Airbnb. So coming from there, in the beginning of 2015, the Senate of Hamburg, which is the government of Hamburg, decided that it was, well, time to address the question of digitization and the question on how digitization is changing all aspects of a city, starting with the mobility, going on over energy, administration, culture, schooling, science, and so on and so forth. So with this strategy, the Senate, the government of Hamburg, posed quite clearly that digitization is a topic which will be driven and addressed with high-level political support, which I think is quite important to get things done in all different parts of the city. And it also stated that digitization is not only relevant, of course, in the administration, but in all kinds of different institutions in the city. And by doing so, the hope connected with this, or the ambition connected with this strategy, is that by going along with the strategy, Hamburg will keep being economically successful and will be able, through the use of innovative technology, to improve the people's lifestyle in the city. Some cities like Vienna and Copenhagen do their strategy, and they have very clear, deterministic aims connected with their strategy, saying we want to reduce emission, or they want to put out more data to the citizens. The strategy of Hamburg is formulated more abstract. We don't believe that much in writing big strategies, doing so for a year or two, and when being finished, realizing that the point where we started already changed, and that the theory and strategy we wrote doesn't fit the situation we are in now, and is outdated once we are finished. So the idea is more about getting projects started in all different areas of the city, and like if you can say you let all different kinds of flowers bloom in all parts of the city, and see at the meadow you have in the end. So as I said, the strategy was approved in the beginning of 2015, and when we try to explain it, we always come from two sides. So one side of the strategy is a more centralized perspective, and the other one is a rather decentralized one. So I already said some things about the centralized part of the strategy. First of all, of course, it's the political support we get from the first mayor. And the strategy poses as well that the State Secretary Council is the steering and monitoring committee for the digitization strategy of the city. So it's not the cabinet itself, but it's just one layer, one level below that cabinet. It's the state secretaries who have to take digitization seriously in their field of responsibility. Moreover, the place where I work, the Digital City Coordination Office, was established in May 2015 to have a very small unit right in Town Hall, right in the Senate Chancellery, to coordinate all the different projects that there are in the city. So we are not doing the projects ourselves, but we are there to, well, have one face to the customer, to do presentations in Brussels, to identify cross-sectoral topics which are relevant for all projects there are, and of course see that what the individual institutions do fits together, so that we align those partial strategies. So we got the State Secretary Council, we got the coordination office I work for, and last but not least, we got the City Science Lab at Hafen City University, which is a cooperation with MIT Media Lab, and is kind of a think tank with a focus on urban development and urban development combined with digitization issues. So we got these three centralized components of the strategy. Then, as I said before, the other, and one might argue more important part, is the decentralized aspect. Because I said we don't do projects. So you might ask, well, who is doing projects? The strategy also states that every ministry, every specialized authority has to write their own digitization strategy. The idea behind that is that you can't do digitization by just setting up a small division close to the mayor, and we hopefully know what digitization is about in all fields of expertise. But it's the strong belief that the people responsible for their for their field of work know best how digitization is going to change that. So the Ministry for Economy and Transport is asked to write their own partial strategy and think about how digitization will change traffic, will change the infrastructure needed, will change the way we use cars and public transport in the city. And this actually ended up in this ministry writing its strategy called IT, so it's a strategy on ITS, on intelligent transport systems, which is addressing many of these issues and is also incorporating many individual projects which will be done in Hamburg in the field of ITS, of intelligent transport systems. This is relevant for the strategy. Moreover, Hamburg is candidate city for the ITS World Congress in 2021. So if you want, you can keep your fingers crossed that maybe in 2021 there will be many interesting things to see in Hamburg regarding ITS. So ITS is one important partial strategy. Another one is e-government, or digital administration, as we call it. We got a project there under the heading of Digital First, which addresses e-government, hopefully in a fundamentally different way, providing really better services for citizens. We got strategies in the field of culture, an e-culture agenda, which was already drafted in 2014. We get the Hamburg Open Online University, which is a cooperation between all 6 state-run universities in Hamburg, building a platform for interconnected learning from all 6 universities, as I said. So far, I tried to depict of what this strategy changes in administration, maybe in specialist authorities, but this strategy addresses not just the administration, it addresses as well public companies, for example, a company running subways and bus lines in Hamburg and many others, and they are also, of course, influenced by these partial strategies because the projects that are implemented in this digital domains, of course, influence all the institutions interrelated with the ministries. And of course, they influence the way we work with companies, which of course are important for implementing these projects. So the strategy reaches further than just administration and just state agencies. So much to the strategy. I said before, the office I work for, the Digital City Coordination Office, is also there to identify cross-sectoral topics, well, and what to be more obviously cross-sectoral than the use of data. So one topic we looked into more closely is the use of data. So this is what we are all here for. And there's one point I like to make when it comes to the use of data. If you follow the discussion related with the smart city and the use of urban data, it very often comes down just to use new data. You've got new sensors, you got new real-time data, you got prognostics, you got analytics, you've got all these kinds of issues, you got all the other issues related with it, be it data protection, cybersecurity, renewing the IT architecture. Everything, all these issues are important, and of course we need to address these and be at the forefront to see where this whole discussion leads. Because this is at least, of course, a political responsibility to see how these things change the city and change the way we interact with citizens and change the way we interact with companies. But, and this is what I'm trying to say, of course the new data is important. But coming from Hamburg, I can say we got loads of old data we don't use properly. We don't use in a digitized manner. And of course, we get several things, and I'm coming to them later, where we do use data. But my feeling is we don't want to be stuck in the perspective regarding the day after tomorrow. But today, there are many things we can do to make a city smarter, to make services better, to use infrastructure in a better way. So I'll just give you a few examples on the use of old data, just to underline what I just said, and then, of course, address some topics or some projects where we use new data and then see, of course, that sometimes you have to combine both. So what about old data? The first thing I like to stress is that you have to put out the data to make them usable. Everybody would agree to that. So how do we do that in Hamburg? Already in 2012, the Senate of Hamburg approved the so-called Hamburg Transparency Act, which was kind of new back then. And some people said, well, some people said that Hamburg is the most transparent state in Germany, which it was in 2012. And just a few weeks ago, there was a study saying the same again. So Hamburg is quite good at opening their cabinets and putting the data out to the citizens. So this Transparency Act states that we are obliged to put out the data. We don't wait for citizens or companies to ask and say, well, do you have this or that data? Please put it out. But we have to proactively post it in a downloadable fashion, which we do in the Hamburg Transparency Portal. So you can find all sorts of data, beginning with contracts regarding public services, public tenders, and so on. And you find as well spatial data. So Hamburg has a very, I'd say, strong spatial data infrastructure in Hamburg, where we got close to 2,700 data layers regarding all kinds of spatial information about properties, about traffic, socio-demographic data, and you can download them manually or via an API. So these are two strong examples on where we are going out and putting out the data and making them usable for citizens, for companies. One problem is I always wonder, if you talk about open data, you always hear that, well, you just put out the data and it will be put to good use and there'll be companies using them and making money from them. That's kind of difficult to detect And I asked the people responsible for the transparency portal, and we are just not allowed to check who downloads our data. So we just don't know. We can't check who ran the API and harvested the data. So we don't have that much a clue on who's using our data. So much to putting out the data to the people. It's not just about giving it away, of course, it's also about combining the data we have. One interesting project we did was a project called Finding Places. As you're all well aware, in 2015 we had a huge discussion about housing, or about refugees in general, and about housing of refugees. So what the first mayor of Hamburg, Olaf Scholz, initiated was this project, Finding Places, saying we want a wider discussion on where to put up housing for refugees in Hamburg, because we got a huge discussion. Everybody say, well, maybe it's a good idea to have refugees, but don't put their accommodation in my backyard. So it's not in my backyard as always. And the idea was don't let the citizens or the people just say, no, I don't want to have it, but make them or get them into a position where they have to argue in a more technical way, and to show them how difficult it actually is to find places to put up accommodation in a densely populated city as Hamburg. So we had workshops in all 7 districts of Hamburg with a nice new tool called Cityscope, which was developed by the MIT and then further developed by the City Science Lab. So you got a big table with a projection of the map of Hamburg, and then you got color-coded the areas available, so public areas available for putting up housing or accommodation for refugees. Red saying, very hard, almost impossible to put something up there. Yellow, well, it might work. Green, might be quite easily done. And to do that color coding, of course, you had to combine all different sets of data. So what about nature reserves? What about problems with property development? What about noise exposure? What about, you have them in Hamburg, statuary floodplains? Is there a public park? Is there a playground? So, and all these things had to be combined just to do that color coding. And then based on that color coding, red, yellow, or red, the citizens had to discuss where to put up the accommodation for refugees. So they were much closer to the way decisions are made by the administration, rather than saying, oh, it's a good idea to put the accommodation over there. The point I'm trying to make is, again, we've got old data. We got a new technology like the Cityscope model, where you can interact directly and see which area is available or not, and put old data to a better use. One more example, it's a project called AblePlus, like the river flowing through Hamburg, and that's an electronic information system of public subterranean cable routes. So you got an information available on the net with all information on power lines, water lines, gas lines, fiber optics, and district heating. This, again, might sound trivial, but so far, if you had to do civil engineering, you had to ask at all kinds of different institutions before you could dig your first hole, if you want. And this took a lot of time and slowed down constructions. So what this project did with AblePlus is combine all these information, make it available online, and by that, of course, speeding up the process of civil underground engineering. So far to using old data. I hope it has been clear that doesn't sound that fancy as analytics or prognostics, but my experience is that it really helps the city, it helps the citizens, it helps the company, it helps the administration. And you have to look for use cases where you really see what they'll be good for. Of course, using innovative technologies is good, is necessary, but as a city, we have to really look very closely where do we improve our services and where do we invest our money to make services better. So do we use new data in Hamburg? Of course we do. I'll just highlight that again with some projects. One being what we call the transparent roadwork system, which again is quite simple. If you do traffic management, you're lucky or you're happy if you know where all the construction sites are in the city to predict traffic jams, traffic obstructions, maybe to change the switching times for your traffic lights. It's quite easy to do that with big construction sites that are there for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. If you have construction sites which are there just for a day or maybe a week, it's much more difficult, at least in Hamburg. So the idea was, you got this construction site signs. I didn't found the word in English. In German, it's Barke. Nobody knows what that is. Those are the signs with the red and white stripes with a flashing light on top of them. You just see them alongside of construction sites. And the only thing we did is put a GPS sensor in this light on top of the thing, and a tilt sensor to tell us whether it's standing upright or has been knocked over. And this information goes into a backend to the people responsible for traffic management. And they tell them this construction site is active. They don't do it now, but they can, of course, forward the information to TomTom or to Google Maps so that you have a real-time knowledge on where day-to-day construction sites are. This is a project which started in the port and now will be rolled out in the rest of the city. So just a few sentences which help you very concrete in a very concrete manner with traffic management. Another example from traffic management. We are looking very closely into using infrared cameras for providing real-time traffic data, not just on a few traffic lights, but on all 1,700 traffic lights in Hamburg, and also installing Wi-Fi detection devices. So they know you pass traffic light number 1 and your mobile is trying to connect with Wi-Fi. And if you pass the next traffic light, you'll be recognized, or your mobile phone will be recognized. So you don't just have the count of the cars passing by, you also have the relation of the cars going from point A to point B. Saying that, of course, we are in close, or we have an ongoing discussion with the people responsible for data protection in Hamburg because, well, the pinging of mobiles and the question whether this is personal data, of course, is an ongoing one. So these are two projects, this construction site thing and real-time traffic data, maybe a last one, which is very prominently discussed in the field of smart city is smart parking. Many cities look into that, of course, to provide better information of where parking zones are free. And there was just last week a project presented on CeBIT in Hamburg, which is done in cooperation with Deutsche Telekom, aiming at equipping 11,000 parking zones in Hamburg with sensors, with parking sensors telling whether, well, the parking zone is occupied or not. And these are connected via narrowband networks with the back end. So these are some examples on where we use new data. Again, it's just a start, but we are looking for fields where we actually can use the data. Having mentioned these three projects, it's clear that especially in the field of mobility and traffic, there are loads of data already being produced, and we have to look real closely on how to integrate that into one IT infrastructure. I mentioned before Hamburg's candidacy for the ITS World Congress. So one project is not just to have these isolated projects, but to build an ITS IT infrastructure to get all this information integrated from construction sites, from this infrared cameras, the information the police has, the fire department have, and all other relevant institutions, including public transport, and set this up in one IT framework to have the information, well, flowing more freely. Having said that, my argument would be that what you need if you want to use data in an urban context, you need both. You need old data and you need new data, and you need to combine them. And we're just in the process of looking at that from a city perspective. We call that Urban Platform for Hamburg. The idea behind that is to connect existing and future IT systems and services, use their analytical capabilities to provide information, to support decisions, or maybe as a step in the future to do the decisions on their own based on algorithms. So the point is, you don't have the data just, well, in the often quoted silos. In one part, you have to make it usable, put it in a different context, combine it, and then put it to a new use. Of course, connected with these ideas or these ambitions behind the urban platform of Hamburg, we got some objectives like data-based innovation and more efficient city management and more citizen engagement, for example, like in the project Finding Places I mentioned. And behind that, there are several key principles. First of all, you've got to make data available digitally. You have to make it possible to reuse the data. Of course, you have to have standards technically and semantically. You need to ensure interoperability. You have to take into account data protection and security. And last but definitely not least, maybe it's a good idea to start from the question, where do I use the data? I stressed that before, so you make sure you know what you need the data for, what the new service will be. Right now, we just finished a concept on this terminology on the urban platform. We did some expert workshops, and now we are looking very closely who can be our data expert in the city. So we don't have an institution for the handling of data, and we don't really have an institution who thought about a citywide platform to interchange data. As mentioned before, we got the state agency for geoinformation and surveying who do the spatial data infrastructure. And they have quite some experience in handling data. So it might be a good idea to widen their responsibility and make them responsible for citywide data usage, so that with every project you have, there'll be someone involved who is responsible for data usage in the city in the future. So we can build, from the ground on and start from some projects and start from there to build this urban platform for Hamburg. Coming to an end, just to wrap it up, some conclusions. I said it before, of course, use new technologies, pilot them, implement them, learn what is possible, what is not possible, where does it help you. But don't forget the data you already have. Of course, then you have to handle the legacy systems and change the legacy systems you have. But the old data you already have is probably there for a reason, so for a good reason, and so use it. Again, big data is fine. Of course, we'll need analytics, but also ask yourself, what do I need the data for? Don't just trust the promise that all the data there is will be used. Maybe it will be, but as a first step, of course, you don't have funding for everything, so you probably start there where you can see the purpose of doing it and the advantage of doing it. So put your money where you can see you get something out of. Then it might also be a good idea to identify trend-setting sectors like we did with spatial data and mobility, so that some ministries, some topics are moving faster than others, and maybe use them to accelerate the development in others, and start developing there in these trend-setting sectors. I also already said, ask yourself, who's the data expert in your city? Is there some institution which has knowledge, which has expertise on the issue, and strengthen them? And finally, I think it really helps that we have the discussion we are having today, so on new data, on new technologies. This is good for itself, just for the sake of discussing it and making us able to address the relevant issues, but it's also good because it helps you addressing, so to speak, the old topics you have, things you have discussed for the last 10 to 15 years in the government regarding combining IT systems, regarding legacy systems. But when you start the smart city discussion now, why not use this momentum to activate these old topics again and make it easier to change things in there? So I'd like to close with a quote I actually heard in a presentation from SAP, just for the sake of quoting correctly, so the credits go to them. They said, think big, so see the whole picture, but start small. And I would totally agree. Of course, you have to see the whole picture, but I've experienced many smart city discussions are that abstract and that far-reaching, and you end up just with general positions on efficiency, but you don't get down to concrete projects and you don't get down on how to change the city very, very concrete. So think big, start small, and hopefully that will change things for the better. Thank you. So, and if there are, I'm happy to answer questions. And maybe you can use the mic. Just, yeah. Yeah. No.
So, first of all, good morning. Very interesting project about the city scope model, like trying to use color coding for detecting potential living areas for refugees.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess this is based on a smart algorithm where you take data, and then that's the way that you create the color coding.
Oh,
That's one question. And second question, it would be nice if you can talk a little bit more about how these workshops with the citizens worked. Like you said, after you have this color coding mapping, then you show this to the citizens and make decisions, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So the color coding is much more simple, actually. It's just all static data that there is on building regulations. As I said, is there a nature reserve? Do you have is there a parking lot? And so on and so forth. What is it with property development? Will it be very expensive? Will it be cheap? How many regulations are on this certain area? Can you use it or can't you use it? Do you have to change the law? Do you have the legally binding development plan, and so on and so forth? So there are no algorithms involved. It's really just about combining the data there is. So and that went into that color coding. You had these workshops, and so maybe I have to make this clear. This is just public areas, so no privately owned property, which would have been even more difficult probably. So just publicly owned property. And after that, So in every workshop we had suggestions about areas, from running from, I don't know, from 5 to 25, and these again were checked by the responsible authority, and just they looked into more detail whether it was just a nice suggestion or whether it was really feasible. So, and this ended, I think, so there were, in total, I think there was something around 20 areas feasible, but in the end, it ended up just with one area where refugee housing will be put. So this is for several reasons. One is we don't need that much housing. Of course, you have an ongoing discussion. Well, this was a huge project. This cost some money, and you end up with just one refugee accommodation for a few hundred people. Of course, this would have been nice if it would have been more areas. But the idea behind it was to get into discussion with the citizens. So it's not all about identifying the right areas. It's also about making it understandable why it is so difficult to put up refugee accommodations, and have really the discussion with the citizens throughout the whole city.
Just before we take any more questions, I'd just like to make sure that something we've just learned, the mics in your chairs are not wireless. So if you pull it out and there's no cable, you have a problem. Please take one from the next chair, or if there isn't one, we do have roving mics in the sound booth at the back.
Okay, just thanks a lot. Very quick, which channels you use to acquire citizens into this process?
Just the regular ones. Of course, everything's online. We got press releases. We got a huge press conference with the first mayor. So then you got the media coverage. But it was mostly documented online via homepage for the project.
Hello, so thank you very much. My name is Giorgio. Many thanks for the presentation. I have a very general question, actually. So you mentioned that differently from what's going on in different cities like Vienna or Copenhagen, you don't really have a purpose, if I can phrase it like this, in your digitalization strategy, but it's rather a bottom-up approach when it comes to the interactions between the different, let's say, the departments in the government of the city. So how are you actually making work as you don't have the final purpose?
Well, of course there is a purpose, but I would say it's it's a political purpose. The strategy says, well, we use technology to improve the quality of life and economic attractiveness. So this is very widely put. Just as you said, of course it's a bottom-up approach, and the idea behind it is that people know best in their own field of expertise what are the solutions which are readily achievable if you use digital technology. So if the people from mobility say we want to reduce traffic jam and we want to reduce emission by strengthening public transport, of course, well, we look into it from our coordinating perspective and say, well, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. You reduce emissions and you strengthen public transport and you improve traffic management. Sounds fine with us and is accordance to the things the Senate already decided. So we rather check whether these aims of these partial strategies fit into the overall political agenda of the Senate of Hamburg. So we haven't got individual aims for the digitization strategy apart from the two I mentioned, but of course we check whether this fits into the overall agenda, political agenda of Hamburg.
Yes, I have a question relating to that, because if you have all these different projects in different sectors, How then do you cope with projects that cross sectors, that are maybe also not only mobility but also energy, or for example?
Well, we do. So one idea, of course, this is part of our job. So I said we got to do this coordination, and we did well what administration usually does. We've built a committee called it's called Digital City Committee, and in there are, and this again is stated in the strategy, all institutions relevant for the digitization in Hamburg. So we had to ask ourselves, who are these institutions? So we ended up with a rather large committee with 50 institutions in it. So this is like the organized way. There people start talking with each other, and of course they talk and present projects. So this is the organized way, and then it's more about finding people from different fields of responsibilities to interact, and then they themselves come up with ideas for projects. And then, of course, this is interconnected, so you got just the personal contact. If it comes to financing, it gets kind of difficult, but we got, in Hamburg, we got in the budget one position which is there just for IT projects. So for all IT projects in the city, but this is from classical IT project to state-of-the-art smart city project. And we have to, find other means to connect these budget position more closely with the strategy to ensure that we fund the right projects. So, yeah.
Very quick question. How do you know what you don't know? How do you keep yourself on top of what is technologically available to decide what is best for Hamburg?
Yeah, well, travel to Brussels, talk to other cities. Of course, we talk to companies. This actually is, one part. We realized that once our office was established, in the first year, I don't know how many companies called and said, well, we got this perfect solution for parking, for detecting X, Y, Z, for your IT backbone, for IT services, whatever. So of course this gives us a glimpse of what there is, and then again it's interconnecting with the people who really know their business in Hamburg. So we got Dataport, which is responsible for, I don't know, 6 federal states in Germany for the IT infrastructure. So if we are not sure, of course, we just forward it to the people who really know what they are talking about, interconnect with them. As I said, the City Science Lab at the Hafen City University helps us. But this is one, of course, this is one strategic aspect, and this is one idea behind the whole strategy, to get administration into the position to be able to know what's right, what's not, how to address these issues in public tenders, and so on and so on. And we experienced that in some fields of the city, we have the feeling there are experts who know what's going on out there. And in some fields, of course, we are still trying, to catch up, so to speak. So, thank you very much. If there are no more questions.